So the most money that I've ever lost gambling came in 2009 when I played in the World Series of Poker. Now, when it comes to gambling addiction, I think it's really important to talk about how much money you've lost and to be honest with yourself. Because if you don't, you sort of just sweep that information under the rug and it kind of gets lost. And you can never really truly admit that you are addicted to gambling. But back in 2009, not only was I addicted to gambling, but I had the poker bug like so many other people in North America. So to give you some backstory, back in 2009, I was 24 years old and I booked a hotel and flight with my girlfriend, now wife Tina, and I bought in directly for $10,000 US, which at the time I was maybe making $40,000 a year. So we're talking about using 25% of my annual income to play in a single poker tournament. Obviously, any rational human being would know that spending a quarter of your annual earnings on a single poker tournament is not a smart financial decision to make. But for myself, the World Series of Poker was my version of the NBA Finals or the Super Bowl. It was my dream tournament that I just wanted to play in once in my lifetime. Now, you'd probably think that if I were to play in a $10,000 tournament, I'd probably fly first class, rent a nice car, and maybe get like a luxury hotel. But it ended up being the exact opposite because I didn't have a lot of money. So I'm pretty sure we stayed in one of the cheaper hotels, which was the Flamingo, I believe, which is directly across the street from the Bellagio. And for food, we kind of just went to wherever was the cheapest. So it was either the day before or the day of the tournament that I went to the casino and bought in directly. And because there's so many people playing in this one poker tournament, they had multiple days set up for all the people. So they would either tell you that you're playing in day 1A, 1B, 1C, or 1D, or something like that. So I ended up playing on day 1D. And after I got my starting chip stack, which I think was 3 times your buy-in, so they gave you 30,000 in chips, you would go over into the casino room and find out what table you were seated at. Now, normally when you play in these massive poker tournaments, your very first table is full of people you've never seen in your life. But unfortunately for me, I wasn't so lucky. Directly to my left, I had one of the most well-known and successful high-stakes poker players, which was David Benjamin. At the time, David Benjamin was probably the best poker player who was from France, and he played in the World Series of Poker, the World Poker Tour, and he was all over television. He was pretty much a high-stakes regular who was an amazing player. I just googled David Benjamin, and as of 2020, he has a career winnings of $7.8 million. So we're talking about a poker player who's extremely successful and skilled. Now, this was extremely problematic for me because in poker, whenever you're playing a hand or you're in a pot, the player on your left has a huge advantage because you have to act first before them. And not only is David a really good player, but he was extremely aggressive. So whenever I was trying to raise or bet or try to like win some chips or get in a pot, he would always fight back and he would always put pressure on me. And it was very difficult for me in the beginning to try to win any hands. And this is pretty much a nightmare situation in a poker tournament because in the beginning, when you're playing with a whole bunch of unknown players, usually they're not very skilled. So you can kind of win pots here and there and take hands from them and bluff, and you can get in these situations where you can build your chip stack. But having David directly on my left for 10 hours, it was just so disheartening and so discouraging for me because he just kept crushing me. And even though I was struggling, I tried to make the best out of the situation by watching the master at work. It was so inspiring to watch such a high-level player take control of the table and just pretty much dominate everyone. Like, not only was he winning chips for me, he was, making jokes and making fun of other players and poking fun of them, just telling stories, and everyone was in awe of this guy because of how skilled he was. But at the same time, he was just taking everyone's chips slowly and commanding the table. So after playing day 1D with David for over 10 hours, I finished the day with 27,650 chips. So I lost about 2,350 from my starting stack. Once the day finally ended, one of the tournament directors would come over and they give all of us plastic bags and we'd have to take all of our chips and bag them. And then you would count your stack, and I believe they would write with a marker your name and how many chips you had on the plastic bag, and then you would put them in storage, and then you would come back for the next day. Now, normally these 10-11 hour days, you'd be finishing like late into the night, like after midnight. So I was extremely hungry, tired, exhausted. So all I wanted to do was get a quick meal, go to bed, and get ready for day 2. I surprisingly slept pretty good that night, and I woke up the next day ready to have some lunch, I think, and then head over to the casino and start day 2. Now, the best thing about day 2 was that I got seated at a brand new table with completely different players, so I didn't have to play with David anymore, and I was super excited about that. And I was like, finally, I can, maybe try to do something in this tournament and build up my chip stack. So I got to my new table early and I started counting my chip stack as I was the only person there. And I sort of was like looking around at the table. I could see all their plastic bags and trying to figure out who had the lowest stack, who had the most amount of chips, and try to figure out like my general strategy for the day. And it was a breath of fresh air once all the other players came and I had no idea who any of them were. And this was a poker player's dream, as you want to play with people who aren't as skilled as you, aren't as knowledgeable in the game. And you don't want to play with the big name players. Like, these are the guys you want to kind of stay away from, even though you see them on TV and it might be exciting. But generally in poker, you want to play with people that either you don't know or aren't good at the game. And this table ended up being completely different than the one I played on in day 1, as David was a player who was extremely aggressive and confident. He was like constantly raising and putting pressure on everybody, and it was really difficult to try to get in a pot and win anything. But on this new table in day 2, everyone was like super passive and weak, and no one was really taking charge of the table. So I saw this as a perfect opportunity to build my stack. By now, the blinds, which are the 2 force bets that players have to put in, were at 250, 500. So my 27,000 chip stack was still decent to a point where I could maneuver and try to win some pots. Even though I was one of the smaller stacks of the table, once I realized that everyone was playing passive, I sort of used what I learned from David and started to play more aggressive and take control. There wasn't too many eventful hands, as I was just slowly winning small pots from players that were just folding way too often. But near the end of the day, I did pick up King Queen of Spades, where I flopped 2 spades, ended up getting a 3rd spade to make a flush, and I won a decent sized pot. So I was feeling pretty good as I was building up my chip stack, and I felt like I was the best player at the table. But then everything started to go bad after one hand. Now, I don't remember exactly how the hand went, but I think the blinds were 300, 600, and I picked up 2 queens. I raised to around 1,600, and there was this old guy who wasn't really playing too many pots, and he re-raised me to 4,000. Now, right away, my alarm bells were going off because this guy wasn't really doing much, so obviously he had a strong hand. I think he raised to about 4,000 and I called. Now, the flop came something super dry like 10-4, no suits, so it was like heart, diamond, club. So my 2 queens were looking pretty good. He bet, I think it was 2,000, and I called. The turn was an 8. He bet 3,000, again kind of smallish. I still had 2 queens, which was an over pair to the board. I called again, and the river was a 2. So now the board was something along the lines of 10, 2, 4, 8, 2. So there were no straight possibilities, there were no flushes. And at the end, he bet again kind of small, something like 4,000. And I thought, there's gonna be a large percentage of the time he probably just has like 2 aces, 2 kings. But for whatever reason, I just couldn't fold my 2 queens, as I just felt it was too strong, and I kind of convinced myself he maybe had a 10, but in hindsight, it was more than obvious he had such a strong hand. I did end up calling the 4,000 after some deliberation, and he showed 2 kings and he took the pot. Now, this was a pivotal moment for me because I lost about 13,000 chips in that hand, and I had originally built up my 27,000 chip stack to 40,000, but then I lost it all back in that one hand. And this was so demoralizing for me because right after this hand happened, we went to dinner break and I found out that my table broke. And when your table breaks, it basically means that they're taking all the players from your table and dispersing them to all the other tables. And that's sort of like how they compact the tournament as time goes on. And I was so upset from this because I was doing so well at this table. It was full of players that were playing extremely passive. I felt like I was in a really good spot to build up my chips. And right before the table breaks, I ended up losing this massive pot and I was back down to 27,000. And this was where things got even worse for me because the new table that I got moved to was full of players with like massive chip stacks. There was a bunch of guys that had like 100 or 150,000 in chips. And I was either the lowest or like the second lowest chip stack at the table. And not only that, but a lot of these guys were like early 20s, mid 20s, and extremely aggressive players. So I went from a table that was passive and very easy for me to control to one that was full of aggression, and it was just extremely difficult for me to win any hands. I think I ended up playing for about 2 or 3 hours at this table, and I'm pretty sure that I didn't win a single hand, as my 27,000 chip stack dwindled down to about 22,000. Now, I was getting really worried about this because as time goes on, the blinds keep escalating higher and higher and higher. And as your stack goes down, it's really difficult to try to get into a pot and sort of make a hand and win anything. But luckily for me, again, my table broke and I was being moved to a brand new table, which I was extremely thankful for. Now this is where things got really interesting. Normally in poker, whenever you get moved to a new table, it's generally good advice to take it slow and try to figure out how everyone is playing before you play any big pots. Now unfortunately for me, I had just moved to this table and maybe played 2 or 3 hands, and I looked down and I got 2 jacks. As I said, the blinds were 500 and 1,000, and this was roughly how the hand went. There was a player who limped in and called 1,000, and then it was folded over to me, and I raised somewhere in the range of 3,200. Now it was folded over to the guy in the big blind, and this is where he unexpectedly shoved all in for, I think it was like 35 or 40,000 chips. The first guy who called, he folded, and then it was action over to me. Now this was the first time in the entire tournament where I was faced with a decision for my tournament life. Up until this point, I was, happy playing a bunch of small pots and kind of slowly building up my stack from there. But as I said, moving to that table with a bunch of aggressive players has pretty much killed me. So I think I had about 19,000 chips behind if I were to fold my 2 jacks. And I sort of went into the tank, which is a poker term for sort of like thinking, like going deep into thought and try to figure out what to do with your hand. As I wasn't happy about putting my tournament life at stake by going all in with 2 jacks, right? Because if he has something like aces, kings, queens, like I'm not in good shape. I'm in a very rough position mathematically. But I was really kind of thinking things over. I was looking at the guy. He was in, I believe, his mid 30s, I think, something like that, European guy. And he didn't look overly confident. He looked kind of nervous, to be honest. And that was like my initial reaction to the situation. I was sort of looking at him and he didn't seem overly strong. And also, by the way he bet, like I only raised 3,000 and then he re-raised like 35,000 on top of that. He just like went all in. And I was thinking like, would he do that with something like 2 aces, right? And so over time, as I thought about it more and more, I think I was thinking for about a good 2 minutes. And slowly, I started eliminating all the bigger hands from his range that I thought he had. And I really had this instinct where I thought he maybe had like 2 7s or 2 8s, like a pair in the middle, where he sort of wanted to just push us out, take my 3,000, take the 1,000 from the guy who limped in and take all the blinds and antes and, just build up like a little stack like that. And so if he does have a hand like 2 7s or 2 8s, or maybe even like an ace king, ace queen, my 2 jacks fares really well against all 4 of those hands. I'm either 50-50 against both or I'm dominating the other 2. Now, the other reason I was thinking about calling was if I fold and only have 19,000, like I need to do something. I need to find a spot to build my chips or else I'm just gonna get dwindled away. So after 2 minutes of deliberation, I finally decided he either has 2 7s, 2 8s, ace king or ace queen, and I'm just gonna go for it. This is a spot where I think I'm either a huge favorite or I'm just like a 50-50 coin flip, and I want to try to double up my chips in this situation. So I ended up calling. I pushed my 19,000 in the pot. I flipped over my 2 jacks and he had this disgusted look on his face and he flipped over 2 10s. So mathematically, this was pretty much a dream situation. When you have one pair versus a smaller pair, it's roughly like a 4-to-1 favorite. I think the odds are 82% to 18%, give or take. So I was like super excited. He actually had a little bit stronger hand than I gave him credit for, as I thought he had like 2 7s or 2 8s. 2 10s is a good hand in this spot. And so I was like, please, one time, just, I just need the jacks to hold up. I need to fade the 10. And the dealer takes out the first 3 cards, and at the very top, the first card is a 10. And the flop comes out like 10, 9, ace. Turn is a 4 and the river is a 2. And it just came so quick, so fast. I just realized I had busted from the main event and I was eliminated. This was probably the most disheartening and saddest I've ever felt when it came to any form of poker tournament or gambling, as not only did I just lose $10,000 US, but I had been eliminated from this dream tournament that I hoped to play in one day, that I hoped to win, and I was in a massive position to double up my chip stack to about I guess 44, 45,000, which would, put me in a good situation to make it through day 2 and hopefully make it to day 3, which is when you eventually get into the money. And all of my hopes and dreams were crushed when the dealer just put out that 10 right on the flop. So after getting eliminated from the World Series of Poker, which was my dream to play in for years, I just generally felt sad and dejected. So we went out and had some dinner as we were still going to be in Vegas for a few more days. The only problem was that by being in Vegas for a few more days, I got into a position where, and I know that a lot of gambling addicts will relate to this feeling, is that I wanted to chase my losses, as losing $10,000 for one single poker tournament was an extreme amount of money to lose. And so I spent the next few days playing a bunch of smaller tournaments and cash games to try and win back some of that money. But again, unfortunately for me, which seems to be the theme of this story, is that I was unsuccessful in winning any of the other smaller tournaments. And I think I ended up losing an additional $2,000 from just the cash games that I was playing on the side. So if we were to add up the total of the buy-in for the World Series of Poker, the amount of money that I lost in the cash games, also even just hotel, flight, accommodations, and food, for the few days that I was in Vegas, I lost a total of 12,000 US dollars, which was the most money I've ever lost gambling. Now, I believe this is important to share because if you're struggling with gambling addiction or you have a friend or family member who is, it's extremely, extremely important to be honest and transparent with yourself when it comes to the amount of money you're spending and losing. Because far too often, whenever you're gambling and you have that dopamine rush, it's so easy to sweep that amount under the rug and you just kind of forget it and you put it in the back of your mind. But if you really look at it, if you really look at how much money you withdraw from your bank account, how much you spend at the casino, or how much you just gamble away on a regular basis, it's alarming at how much that value can add up over time. So if you enjoyed these type of gambling videos from my past, please let me know in the comment section below, and don't forget to subscribe if you want to know when I post a new video. And here's a video about how I finally overcame my gambling addiction. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.